Welcome back, Defenders. The last 48 hours have been interesting. To recap, President Trump called Zelensky a dictator, attacking his credibility. And you know who loved this? The Kremlin and every dictator around the world. Donald Trump, for as long as I've known him, has never criticized any dictator. If you want proof that President Zelensky is not a dictator, Donald Trump is not saying anything nice about him. Donald Trump, for his entire political career, has only ever said nice things about dictators. So there's your proof that President Zelensky is not a dictator. But this is backfiring horribly against President Trump because most Americans don't believe this or want to tolerate this, that Putin is sympathetic, that the Russians are the good guys in some way, and the United States should be cooperating with them or helping them. 81% of Americans don't trust Putin. Per the polling data, a total of 81% of respondents, including 73% of Republicans and 93% of Democrats, distrust Vladimir Putin. So I do believe at some point in the next month, Putin and Trump are going to meet, and Donald Trump is going to try and say that Putin wants peace, and we can trust him, and he'll agree to a ceasefire. We then have to have elections for Zelensky, and then once Ukraine gets a new president, we'll figure out the fine details. Who gets the city of Kherson? Who gets the city of Zaporizhia? Who gets the city of Kharkiv? And Americans are confused. And once again, we're getting polling data. What do Americans actually think? And even with Donald Trump calling Zelensky a dictator, only 22% of Americans are willing to go along with that fantasy talk. Meanwhile, 45% say, of course he's not. 33% are confused. But when it comes to the question of Vladimir Putin, is Vladimir Putin, the guy who's been in charge of Russia for 26 years, is he a dictator? 71% of Americans say yes. Only 9% say no, and that he's some kind of legitimately elected democratic leader of Russia. And this polling data is hilarious because 41% of Americans are calling Donald Trump a dictator 1 month into his term. More Americans believe Trump is a dictator than Vladimir Zelensky. So MAGA is fighting amongst themselves right now on social media. And there are pro-Trump influencers supporting Ukraine, defending Zelensky. Here is a tweet from Piers Morgan, who's a huge Trump supporter, but he has to defend Ukraine. As many inexplicably seem to be throwing President Zelensky to the wolves, I stand with him. He's been an astoundingly courageous and inspiring leader in horrendous circumstances, and deserves so much better than the way he is currently being treated and smeared. Here's a video from Ben Shapiro defending Ukraine. Yesterday, he put out a 47-minute video saying that Trump is wrong to be attacking Zelensky and that we should be supporting Ukraine. So here I am giving a thumbs up to a Ben Shapiro video. So who within MAGA hates Ukraine and is trying to destroy President Zelensky? And it's Elon Musk and his Twitter troll army. And Elon Musk made an appearance at CPAC and he couldn't help himself. He had to attack Ukraine. Every day, all day on social media, all that Elon Musk does these days is attack Zelensky and attack Ukraine.
Go on. Yeah. And imagine if that was your son, your father, what are they dying for? Yeah. What exactly are they dying for? That line the line of engagement has barely moved for 2 years. Yeah. There's a whole bunch of people dead in trenches for what? And I'll tell you what for what. It's like for the biggest graft machine that I've ever seen in my life. That's for what. It's unreal. Like,
this is Elon Musk repeating Kremlin propaganda that this entire war is just graft, it's just corruption from Ukraine, and he doesn't understand what Ukrainians are dying for. Why don't they just surrender to Russia? Give Russia everything they want, and then people don't have to die anymore. Sounds great for Elon Musk, sounds great for Russia. Everyone else, who cares? And I'm going to say, when you show up to a public event and you're speaking on stage and you choose to wear John Belushi sunglasses, this guy's on drugs. He's on probably a lot of drugs. And Elon Musk right now is the one in charge of the US federal government. Donald Trump just lets him do whatever he wants, and this guy is not mentally or emotionally stable. Look at any video clips of him from the last couple months, and there's something seriously wrong with the guy who is, right now, President of the United States. And here is Donald Trump's favorite newspaper, the New York Post, with a front page picture. President Trump, this is a dictator, and 10 other Ukraine war truths we ignore at our peril. This is Maga fighting with Maga. Donald Trump doesn't generally like this, but he's being pulled in two different directions. Elon Musk on one side, let's side with China and Russia, and then everyone who's not effing insane saying, no, America's real allies are the West. They're democracies. Stop doing this. And this has had a huge backlash within Europe. European leaders back Zelensky after Trump's accusations. European leaders are now announcing new scheduled visits to visit Ukraine. So the leaders of different EU countries, I think, every couple days are going to appear in Kyiv to show their support for Ukraine and show their support for President Zelensky. Ukrainian Prime Minister says Europe is more united than ever in its support. If there's one thing that can rally people together, it's their opposition from a hostile force. And right now, Donald Trump is being that hostile force against Canada, Mexico, Europe, Ukraine, everyone. Ugh. And here is a member of Ukraine's parliament, Lizia Vasilenko. She is not part of President Zelensky's party. And these are opposition leaders in Ukraine saying, that's absurd to call the president of our country a dictator.
I'm an opposition MP, as you very well know, and still we are all speaking up in one voice saying that what America today proposes for Ukraine is absolutely unacceptable.
And would you describe him as a dictator, or are you living in martial law?
We are living in martial law because actually Russia has attacked Ukraine in 2014 and then escalated that very aggression to an all-out war. So we in Ukraine have no choice but to live in martial law in order to protect ourselves. But is President Zelensky a dictator? No. He is a president of a free democratic country which is fighting for its survival.
So these are the members of Zelensky's opposition parties, and none of them would call Zelensky a dictator. Here are the election results from 2019, and President Zelensky won in an overwhelming landslide. He got 73% of the votes. He won every oblast except for Lviv, which is where Poroshenko is from. And Poroshenko wants to be president again someday. And he's not even willing to call Zelensky a dictator. Poroshenko is saying, Ukraine can't have elections while Russia is still attacking them. Even if there's a ceasefire without security guarantees, Ukraine can't call for elections within 90 days if the Russians can just resume the war on day 88. So not even Zelensky's main political opponents are calling for elections or criticizing him to the degree that Donald Trump has, calling him a dictator. Here is the ordinary reaction of soldiers on the front lines. This is a Ukrainian soldier. I am fighting for my family, my land, and my community. I will not put up with this bullshit, even if it comes from the American president. I know my values, and I am protecting them. Here's Irish journalist Caolan Robertson on the ground, talking to people in Kyiv, and the people of Ukraine are rallying behind their president in response to Donald Trump's attacks against him. Here's Caolan's report.
The approval ratings for Zelensky are probably about to go through the roof because I've spoken to a huge number of people in Ukraine in the last few hours to get their response to specifically the allegations that Zelensky is a dictator. This includes a friend of mine, Harry, who delivers drones to the front very, very frequently. I went to Pokrovsk with him, which is in the Donbass, a city under fire very often. And the people fighting, the men fighting on the front lines there, have said that they're pretty much over with the US, that Ukraine can't rely on the US anymore, and it's actually ignited their support for Zelensky more than ever.
Zelensky's current approval rating is 57%, but I'm guessing over the next week or two there's going to be a new poll, and it's going to go up because of Trump. It's going to go up to 60 or 70%. And these Ukrainian soldiers fighting on the front lines, you are correct. You can no longer rely on the United States for anything. Donald Trump is not a reliable partner to be doing anything with for anyone. He's a terrible, terrible person. I'm sorry. Now, Zelensky did push back a little bit. Zelensky accuses Trump of falling for Russian disinformation. This was specifically when Trump said Zelensky only has a 4% approval rating. Zelensky said that is Russian disinformation that the president is repeating. And Trump doesn't like being talked back to or contradicted when he lies. So Trump hit him again. And this is member of Ukraine's parliament, Alexei Goncharenko. His advice for President Zelensky is just don't respond. If Donald Trump attacks you or Ukraine, just ignore him. Because if you attack him back, he can't help himself. He'll just escalate every single time. This was a very big mistake from Zelensky to react to what Trump said, that Trump is in a disinformation bubble. After that, it was clear Trump would react. We know that these things, for him being criticized publicly, it is the worst possible thing. The best thing now, I think, just is not to reply anymore and try to find somebody who will message Trump and try to rebuild at least some kind of relationship. Because we need the United States, that's all. We desperately need the United States. So here's the advice. Keep calm and don't blink first. During these talks between the United States, Ukraine, and Russia, Donald Trump is deliberately overvaluing America's contribution, undervaluing Ukraine's strength, undervaluing Europe's support, and overestimating Russia's strength. So what can we do? What can Ukraine do? And just say no. For the Europeans, just say no. And then wait for what Donald Trump will say and do in response. If Ukraine and the European partners just say no to Trump, and he can't force them to do anything, then this makes Trump look weak. And Trump really hates that. I do have to mention this because this is a person and this thing happened. Kellogg's joint press conference with Zelensky canceled at Washington's request. General Keith Kellogg finally made it to Ukraine and met with President Zelensky, but they weren't allowed to talk to the press or the cameras. Washington, D.C., Donald Trump said General Keith Kellogg is not allowed to answer questions or make statements on behalf of the U.S. government. So this was a red herring the whole time. I fell for it, guys. The last 2 months, I assumed that retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg was the special presidential envoy for Russia and Ukraine, because that's what we were told. But this was a lie. General Keith Kellogg is never going to talk to the Russians. He has nothing to do with the negotiations. He's just a sympathetic, friendly face to talk to the Europeans and the Ukrainians, but he has no power or influence or real responsibility. I don't even think Donald Trump likes this guy. This was Mike Pence's national security advisor, so I thought it was very strange that he was picked to handle the negotiations, and now we know he wasn't picked. This was always a diversion, and I fell for it. Trump views Ukraine as a pawn in US-Russia reset. That he is actually negotiating, this is obvious. So Donald Trump is not trying to get the best deal for Ukraine in these talks with Russia. He's trying to get the best deal for himself. He's using the war between Russia and Ukraine as an opportunity to enrich himself and the United States. So he's pretending to be tough on Russia What can I get from Ukraine? He's now being tough on Ukraine. What can I get from Russia? He doesn't care where the lines are drawn. He doesn't care who dies. He's just using the war as an opportunity to find ways to enrich himself. And we do have to be honest, he can do a lot of damage if he chooses to. At the moment, the United States still has sanctions in place on Russia. We haven't released any frozen assets, and we're still delivering military aid that was previously allocated. But he can stop all of that. Trump's team refuses to call Russia the aggressor in a G7 statement, so the Russians are no longer the aggressors in this war, according to President Trump. Russia pushes for unfreezing the $6 billion in assets in U.S. talks. Of course, the Russians want their money back. European defense industry unable to supply critical HIMARS and Patriot systems if U.S. aid ends. Obviously, any European systems that have been donated, they can still get more missiles or maintenance or parts. But if the United States says we're not sending any more parts, maintenance, or missiles for HIMARS or Patriots, then all the systems that have been previously delivered are now bricked. They can't help Ukraine anymore if Donald Trump goes down this path. Europe cannot replace American aid. Military expert warns of a 6-month window. So yes, I do think a clock started. When Joe Biden left office on January 20th, he delivered like $6 billion worth of aid. So Ukraine at the moment has good stockpiles to keep this war going, to hold back the Russians, but it's dwindling. They're probably using and consuming more than is being delivered. And eventually, supplies are going to run thin as we get into this summer. So Ukraine has to adapt, they have to evolve, and the number one resource they have, the number one advantage they have against the Russians is FPV drones. I saw a stat that in just the city of Pokrovsk, Ukraine is using 200,000 FPV drones a month to hold back the Russians. So can Ukraine increase production of these simple, cheap FPV drones? Can European partners increase production of these simple, cheap FPV drones? HIMARS and Patriot missiles are nice, but this is where warfare is going. Stupid, simple, cheap tech to blow up tanks and armored vehicles and kill infantry charging through open fields. So concerning these talks in Saudi Arabia, these are not peace talks. That was never the intention, that was never the purpose. The goal was for the US delegation to meet with the Russians and see, what are you willing to offer us? How can Donald Trump personally benefit by either betraying Ukraine or negotiating a ceasefire for Russia if that's what Russia wants? And it's tragic what happened to really good people like Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio is the current Secretary of State. And I'm going to play for you this clip of previous statements that Marco Rubio has made about Russia in 2014 and 2017.
We should always stand on the side of the vulnerable and the oppressed. Vladimir Putin's recent invasion of Ukraine is a clear challenge to these principles. Some ask, why is this our problem? Well, because we cannot allow the precedent to be set that in order to engage the West in trade and commerce, smaller nations must first seek the permission of their more powerful neighbors. President Obama talks tough about Vladimir Putin, but his actions have not gone far enough to change Putin's calculation that the benefits of his aggression outweigh the costs.
Mr. Tillerson, do you believe that Vladimir Putin and his cronies are responsible for ordering the murder of countless dissidents, journalists, and political opponents?
I do not have sufficient information to make that claim.
Are you aware that people who oppose Vladimir Putin wind up dead all over the world, poisoned, shot in the back of the head? And do you think that was coincidental, or do you think that it is quite possible, or likely, as I believe, that they were part of an effort to murder his political opponents?
I wish we had a tough guy like this representing America in talks with the Russians. But instead, we have a craven, cowardly, spineless sycophant who's only there to make friends with the Russians. To ask the Russians, what do you want America to do? We're here to help. I can show you similar clips from Mike Waltz previously talking tough on Russia, and today under Donald Trump speaking about exciting new opportunities for cooperatives and economic joint ventures with the Russians going forward in the future. Kill me, guys. I am trapped in America, and Donald Trump has sold out all of our democratic values. I'm doing my best this week, guys. I'm doing my best. But this is pretty bad. I do think a ceasefire is coming, though, at some point. And this is the opinion of General Budanov. Here's a recent interview that Budanov gave in which he also expects there to be some kind of negotiated ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia. What do you think? Will a ceasefire be achieved this year? Are you interested in my personal opinion? So this is Budanov responding. I think so. I think so. So the parties are very close to that. This is a paradoxical situation, despite the fact that the starting positions of the parties are diametrically opposed as much as possible. At the same time, I think we will reach a ceasefire this year. How long it's going to be, how effective, that's another question. But the fact that it's going to happen, I think that it's going to happen. There are most of the elements for this to happen. I also think this is going to happen. I think Vladimir Putin desperately wants a real ceasefire prior to the May 9th Victory Day parade. Putin wants to invite Trump to the parade, and Trump loves military parades, so I think he'll say yes. Unless a hurricane hits Florida, I think Trump is going to go to Moscow for this May 9th Victory Day parade. And Putin needs to just regroup, take a breather, consolidate his forces and the occupied territories, and then he can start the war again this winter, or who knows, maybe hold off for a couple years, but he's not going to release his soldiers. He's not going to decrease the size of his military. He's not going to divert military funds for domestic programs and services. Putin is all in on getting the Russian Empire back. Let's now talk about this stupid event, reality check. Trump says Zelensky was asleep during the Treasury Secretary Bessent's visit to Kyiv. I'm not going to play the clip. I know people hate listening to Trump speak, so I'll put the clip down below if you want to listen for yourself. But here's the transcript of what Donald Trump said on Air Force One, talking about this rare earth deal. We had a rare earth deal, and Ukraine agreed to it more or less. And then Scott Bessent actually went there and was treated rather rudely, because essentially they told him no. Zelensky was sleeping and unable to meet with him. He traveled many hours on the train, which is a dangerous trip, and we're talking about the Secretary of the Treasury. He went there to get a document signed, and when he got there, he came back empty. They wouldn't sign the document. I think I'm going to resurrect the deal, or things are not going to make them too happy. And look, it's time for elections. Haven't had an election in a long time. I apologize for my voice, guys. I'm a little congested today. I'm fighting off something, but I'm going to power through today's video. So Trump said that President Zelensky was asleep and refused to meet with the Secretary of the Treasury after he took the 10-hour train ride to Kyiv. Here are the pictures and videos of President Zelensky meeting with the Treasury Secretary in Kyiv. Donald Trump is just a liar. He can't help himself. Whenever he opens his mouth, he is lying about every critical detail. To my international viewers, you just have to get used to this. Everyone in America has been enduring this for a decade now. So Scott Bessent, is sympathetic to Ukraine. I do like this guy, but Trump is the boss. So Secretary Bessent appeared on Bloomberg. This is what he said about the mineral deal.
Well, look, I think President Zelensky, unfortunately, escalated and has put some daylight between.
How did he escalate?
A lot of his remarks in Munich, I thought were inappropriate. President Zelensky, when I met with him, assured me that he'd be signing the minerals deal in Munich. He has not. And look, the real purpose here, and I think it's turned into kind of this media circus, that President Trump had a very elegant plan, and it was bring the Ukrainians closer.
Trump's very elegant plan was a mafia shakedown. Now, initially, Donald Trump said that he wanted $500 billion worth of Ukraine's rare earth resources, and I was okay with that. I mean, $500 billion is a lot, but it's not too far off from current aid provided plus future aid going forward. That made sense. But the secret documents that Trump sent to Zelensky with the Treasury Secretary was for 50% of all of Ukraine's natural resources. That's a mafia shakedown. And in my last video, I showed you that clip from the Batman movie, but there actually was another historical event in which a dictator demanded 50% of everything, and it was Putin. Here's a post from Mikhail Khodorkovsky today. 22 years ago, how time flies. I wrote a report on Russian corruption and told Putin about corruption in his inner circle, giving him examples. This is the famous meeting between Putin and the Russian oligarchs under Boris Yeltsin. This was in the 90s. And they were pushing back because they knew exactly what Vladimir Putin was back in 2003. And then Putin told all of them, you have to give me half. You have to give me 50% of all of your businesses, all of your industries, all of your wealth, or I will imprison and kill all of you. Mikhail Khodorkovsky refused. He refused to give up half of his net worth and businesses to the Kremlin, so Putin put him in jail, and he spent the next 10 years in prison. And all of his businesses were taken, by the way. He used to be the CEO of Lukoil. So according to Axios, U.S. offers Ukraine an improved minerals deal after Trump and Zelensky clash. Donald Trump still thinks he's going to get the rare earths, and we don't know what the new deal is. Maybe Trump took it down to 48%. But here's some analysis from Timothy Milanov. He's the president of the Kyiv School of Economics. Zelensky told Vance Rubio in Munich he couldn't sign this agreement without Parliament's approval, which is true. Unlike the US president, Zelensky's powers are more constrained. Sources say Zelensky's aides urged him to sign the updated proposal to avoid future clashes with Trump and then secure US support. This is also true. I think if Zelensky signed this, Donald Trump would stop attacking him. Some people are saying the proposal is now a win-win, but we don't know the details of the new proposal. There is definitely some kind of culture gap issue. Ukrainians bargain differently. They take harsh offers personally as an affront. This is implicitly confirmed by Waltz's remarks today and a White House source speaking with Axios. This is all pretty silly, guys. People are dying, and Trump is trying to secure the rare earths. Here's a funny observation from Stephanie Baker. I read one of her books about sanctions being placed on Russia. And she says, having covered Ukraine off and on for years, it surprised me that Ukraine would be brimming with rare earth minerals that the country's oligarchs hadn't already captured. The disinformation is out of control. It's possible that Ukraine is overstating or Russia is overestimating these natural resources under the ground. Sure, they're still significant, but are they really more than $10 trillion worth? And there might be some embellishments happening. Who knows? Who knows? But it was something that I was thinking about as well. If there's $10 trillion in untapped resources under the ground, why did the Soviets never dig it up, and why did Ukraine's oligarchs never secure it the last 30 years? But here's the question. Europe's humiliating exclusion from Ukraine talks is its own fault. That's an opinion in the Moscow Times. Here's the cover of The Economist. Europe's worst nightmare. The Russians and the Americans under Trump working together. And my question for Europe is, why is Donald Trump allowed to do this at all? Extract the natural resources of Ukraine, which is on the European continent, and bring it back to America. Why is Europe's natural resources not being used to enrich Europe? Why are the Europeans not going to Zelensky first, saying, partner with us, partner with French or British or Swedish or German companies to get your resources out of the ground, and then we'll fund your defense. We'll make sure that Russia is beaten back, and then those 10 trillion in untapped resources will belong to Europe. Am I missing something here? Like, who's lacking this vision? Here's thoughts from the Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk. Enough talking, it's time to act. Let's finance our aid for Ukraine from the Russian frozen assets. Let's strengthen air policing, the Baltic Sentry, and EU borders with Russia. Let's swiftly adopt new fiscal rules to finance the EU's security and defense now. To my European friends, you've had $300 billion sitting in your banks in Belgium for 3 years now. And I've not really heard any serious discussion from European leaders about using that money to help Ukraine and defeat Russia. Here's Boris Johnson. I know he's not in office anymore, but he is a strong supporter of Ukraine. When are we Europeans going to stop being scandalized about Donald Trump and start helping him to end this war? Of course, Ukraine didn't start the war. You might as well say America attacked Japan at Pearl Harbor. Of course, a country undergoing a violent invasion should not be staging elections. There were no general elections in the UK between 1935 and 1945. Of course, Zelensky's ratings are not 4%, they are actually about the same as Trump's. Trump's statements are not intended to be historically accurate, but to shock Europeans into action. Okay, well that's Boris Johnson's theory, but I think Trump genuinely wants to ally himself with Russia and China because they're rich and powerful. In particular, the US can see $300 billion in frozen Russian assets, mainly in Belgium. That is cash that could and should be used to pay Ukraine and compensate the United States for its support. Why is Europe preventing the unfreezing of Putin's cash? The US believes Belgium, France, and other countries are blocking. It's absurd. We need to get serious and fast. To my European friends, you're going to lose this money either way. I think if the United States fully allies itself with Russia, the United States is then going to apply pressure on the EU to lift all sanctions. As soon as all sanctions are lifted, Russia's going to pull that money out of your banks anyways and never return their business to you. So you can either give that $300 billion back to Russia, because that's the path we're currently on, or you can use that $300 billion, give it to Ukraine, defeat the Russians, and bring real security to your continent. Keep thinking about it. In the meantime, while we debate all this, Ukraine continues to suffer. Odessa recovers after 2 nights of Russian airstrikes. Around 160,000 people in Odessa have lost heating amid freezing temperatures after a Russian attack. Russia is still using Shahed drones to attack Ukrainian cities, but as far as like large-scale missile attacks, it's been a while. I think Russia is saving up their missiles for a massive attack when they think it'll benefit them in future talks and negotiations. We're almost to the end of the video. I just want to mention this story real quick. North Korean troops in Russia reportedly were told they were fighting South Koreans. North Koreans in Kursk were being told on the battlefield they were fighting against South Koreans. So one of the captured North Korean soldiers in Ukraine has officially requested asylum to go to South Korea. Seoul is ready to accept the captured North Korean soldier seeking asylum. Ukraine initially considered a POW exchange, but is open to transferring these North Korean soldiers to South Korea. One piece of good news from the last 2 days that I could find: Lithuania transfers sites with thermal imagers to Ukraine. Thank you so much to the fantastic people of Lithuania. Final video. February 20th is the day when we remember and commemorate those who made their choice to be free, to build a strong European Ukraine, and to resist subjugation. They sacrificed the most precious thing, their lives, so that we could live in a free state. This is Zelensky and the First Lady honoring fallen heroes. That's all for this update video. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. If you found this video informative, give me a thumbs up. Best way to support the channel. Comments and questions, let me know down below. I love hearing from you guys. Till the next video, keep defending the truth, keep defending democracy.